scoffs. Forget the lone wolf theory that guy on the porch was never the actual mastermind. He was nothing more than a glorified sentry, simply killing time out in the dark, until the real intruders finish the job inside. Whenever a property is fortified with a heavy-duty iron entryway like hers, kicking your way in is completely impossible. For 44 agonizing days, detectives and true crime followers alike have obsessed over one single detail regarding the vanished widow. Exactly how did that disguised prowler captured on the porch camera actually manage to breach her sanctuary? Ring camera video reveals him lurking at her threshold during the pre-dawn hours of February 1st, 2026, keeping his face hidden while sporting heavy gloves, a packed rucksack, and a firearm strapped to his side. We have scrutinized those chilling frames time and time again, dissecting every subtle shift in his posture. Experts examined every fleeting moment he loitered outside, desperate to figure out how a stranger infiltrated an 84-year-old grandmother's house under the cover of darkness. All of this supposedly happened without stirring her from sleep, drawing any attention from the nearby residents, or causing the obvious structural destruction that violent break-ins always create. The internet has endlessly argued over theories about picked deadbolts, stolen keys, or unlatched windows, wondering if the profoundly deaf homeowner simply slept through a violent smash and grab. However, our entire line of inquiry has been fundamentally flawed from the very beginning. Ominous instrumental music swells in the background. A crucial detail concerning that main entrance completely shatters the accepted timeline of events, and it was hiding in plain sight within the video all along. You can spot it in every real estate photo, verify it through property filings, and anyone familiar with upscale Southwestern architecture would recognize its significance instantly. Yet, armchair detectives and media outlets entirely missed this massive clue until today. The victim protected her home with a heavy-duty security barricade, relying on far more than just a flimsy wooden frame, a standard lock, or a simple smart camera. It was an impenetrable fortress door crafted from wrought iron and a solid steel chassis, which absolutely cannot be breached without deploying heavy industrial machinery. Bypassing that barricade would generate a deafening racket and leave behind massive gouges that forensic teams would have photographed immediately upon arriving. A local resident living just 4 properties down the street happens to own that identical protective barrier, and her insight is incredibly revealing. She confirmed that the suspicious figure captured on tape was absolutely not attempting to force his way through the main entrance, simply because it would be a physical impossibility. He could never pull that off in the 41 minutes he was present on the porch. The suspect carried no heavy tools, and attempting it would have roused the whole block, leading to one terrifying conclusion: an accomplice unlatched it from within. This shocking revelation completely turns the investigation upside down and rewrites the entire narrative. Let us establish some strict boundaries right now regarding the claims being made in this analysis. What you are about to hear is a working hypothesis pieced together by locals who thoroughly understand the residential defense setups used throughout the Catalina foothills. It relies heavily on open-source intelligence and the professional opinions of retired federal agents who reviewed the files. We are absolutely not pointing fingers at any named individuals, as law enforcement has not issued any warrants or taken suspects into custody. Authorities have entirely ruled out her relatives as suspects, but this breakdown explores the glaring inconsistencies that the forensic data forces us to confront. If that steel mesh barricade effectively eliminated any chance of a frontal assault, what alternate route did the assailant actually take? The chilling conclusion reached by seasoned detectives and protection specialists alike is incredibly uniform. Everyone familiar with these neighborhood locks agrees on one horrifying fact: an insider granted him access. So, let us break down the underlying reasons. The 84-year-old widow vanished without a trace from her upscale Tucson estate during the pre-dawn darkness of February 1st, 2026. She had been a fixture of the local community for over 50 years. Following the tragic death of her husband Charles at age 49 during a 1988 Mexican excavation trip, she brought up her 3 kids alone and remained a devoted Sunday churchgoer. The matriarch was deeply connected with her neighborhood friends and kept her personal finances in perfect order, opting for fierce independence. She resided solo in a $1 million property nestled deep within a secluded, arid cul-de-sac. Towering cacti shielded the yard, providing the exact type of isolation that affluent seniors desperately crave. Though her physical health was steadily declining, crossing even 50 yards unassisted was impossible for her, and she depended heavily on a strict regimen of morning and nightly heart medications. Skipping those crucial pills meant certain death, not to mention the life-saving electronic device surgically embedded near her heart. That internal implant continuously beamed her vital signs directly to a smartphone application using a wireless connection. Heavy-duty audio amplifiers helped her function during daylight hours, but she always left them resting right next to her mobile device when turning in for the night. Once those devices were out, she lived in total silence, completely oblivious to any spoken words, shuffling feet, or creeping intruders lurking outside her door. The frail woman clocked in at roughly 150 pounds. And on the night of January 31st, 2026, she grabbed a rideshare over to her daughter's place for some board games and a home-cooked meal, pulling up to the driveway right around 5:32 in the evening. Nothing about the gathering felt out of place. Sharing food, trading laughs, and rolling dice. It was a perfectly normal weekend bonding session for a tight-knit clan who truly cherished each other's company. The clock struck 9:50 at night when a shadowy car dropped Nancy off, sealing her tragic fate forever. As the heavy motorized doors rumbled shut, the illusion of absolute security settled over the seemingly tranquil property. Her daily pills rested nearby, alongside essential auditory devices and her mobile phone, painting a picture of quiet domesticity. The elderly woman returned to an environment entirely undisturbed, yet 14 agonizing hours would pass without a single welfare check. Complete radio silence enveloped the 84-year-old cardiac patient, with not a soul reaching out or making the short drive to confirm she was resting securely with her ailments managed. The alarm bells didn't ring due to any sudden midnight panic from concerned relatives. Official alerts were never triggered by an eerie intuition that disaster had struck the quiet household. It took a concerned congregation member phoning her child, Annie, at 11:56 on the morning of February 1st, noting the devout woman's unprecedented absence from her mandatory digital mass. Racing against a growing sense of dread, the frantic daughter immediately headed toward the matriarch's residence. Tearing through the estate, she discovered untouched pills, hearing assistance devices, the unmoving vehicle, and personal effects just sitting perfectly still. Every single possession tied to the elderly resident remained completely undisturbed within those four lonely walls. Only the homeowner herself had vanished, prompting a frantic 911 call at 12:03 in the afternoon, well over 10 hours after her fate was sealed. County leadership, specifically the head sheriff, officially verified the chilling sequence of events during extensive media briefings. Federal authorities and highly credible insiders further corroborated these dark details through on-the-record conversations with prominent journalistic outlets. The front porch surveillance device was intentionally blinded at exactly 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, 2026. During a pivotal media address on February 5th, the top brass acknowledged this critical blackout while keeping the exact sabotage methods closely guarded. Authorities made it incredibly clear that this sudden technological failure was entirely unnatural, completely ruling out dead power cells or standard glitches. A sinister truth emerged from the shadows. An intruder actively neutralized the digital watcher before breaching the quiet sanctuary. Ghostly activity triggered the invisible perimeter sensors at 2:12 in the morning, though the blinded lens captured nothing but darkness. The crucial link between the victim's internal cardiac monitor and her bedside smartphone severed completely at 2:28 in the early morning hours. That communication hub sat perfectly still, resting innocently next to her auditory enhancers exactly where it belonged. Prominent federal expert Andrew McCabe broke down this technical anomaly during a highly publicized conversation with network correspondent Brian Anton. Severing that specific wireless medical bond usually indicates only one chilling reality, according to the seasoned investigative veteran. These internal regulators rely entirely on extreme proximity, meaning geographical separation ultimately breaks the invisible digital tether. Dragging the patient outside the operational radius killed the connection, proving undeniably that the helpless woman was actively being taken away. Her physical removal from the premises was completely finished before the clock even struck 2:36 in the dead of night. Around 2.5 miles down the road, sharp-eyed neighbors unknowingly documented a phantom automobile gliding past their automated porch lens, Investigative reporter Liz Kreutz later recreated that exact chilling journey from the crime scene directly to the neighborhood watcher's location. The drive demanded exactly 6 minutes of travel, matching perfectly with the initial cardiac device failure at 2:28 in the morning. Appearing on screen exactly 2 minutes later than expected suggests a sinister hesitation, like an abductor taking a steadying breath before fleeing. Navigating quiet streets around 2:30 in the morning requires absolute nerve when transporting 150 pounds of dark secrets concealed in the trunk. This crucial piece of mechanical witness testimony actually sat well beyond the boundaries of the initial police investigation grid. Local law enforcement strictly limited their early door-to-door inquiries to a tight 2-mile radius surrounding the primary flashpoint. Since the helpful citizens lived an extra half-mile out, authorities initially failed to knock on their front door entirely, taking matters into their own hands. The observant locals surrendered the video after connecting the broadcasted timeline to their own recorded logs. Approaching the silent property at 12:03 in the afternoon, detectives uncovered chilling crimson stains splattered across the entranceway and the concrete parking pad. Laboratory specialists working alongside county officials swiftly verified that the vital fluid belonged definitively to the missing matriarch. Seasoned forensics expert Maureen O'Connell stepped up to offer a deeply disturbing professional perspective on the physical remnants. Having dedicated her life to decoding grim aftermaths, the specialist publicly explained the visual story left behind by the dark droplets. Gravity pulled the liquid straight down without any chaotic smudges or footprint interruptions, indicating a highly unnatural lack of struggle. The complete absence of friction trails led the veteran profiler to share an absolutely chilling conclusion during her televised interview. The fragile homeowner was likely bundled tightly within heavy linens and physically hoisted away from her sanctuary by an unseen intruder. Her final departure from the beloved residence was definitively not a voluntary, conscious stroll out the front gate. Over the course of 10 grueling days, federal cyber teams and corporate engineers managed to resurrect ghost data hidden deep within the disabled surveillance machinery. Unlocking these buried secrets proved crucial, especially considering the device lacked any standard remote storage capabilities. Destroy the camera, and you destroy the evidence. That is how it usually works when video never makes it to the cloud. Whenever a gadget gets smashed or goes dark, those recordings are gone forever. But tech experts at Google somehow resurrected what Patel referred to as ghost data music. Tiny digital breadcrumbs that managed to ping the main servers in a split-second window before the lens went completely dead. Extracting that digital phantom took 10 grueling days of coding magic, and the resulting visuals ended up plastered across every major broadcasting channel across the United States. We see a disguised individual lurking outside Nancy Guthrie's doorway, displaying a swagger that behavioral experts flagged as total territorial confidence. They never paused to think, and they certainly never bothered to look over their shoulder in fear. Keeping a low profile, the intruder marched straight toward the lens with the precision of a person who had memorized its exact location, giving the glass a quick double tap to check its power status before smothering it with leaves ripped straight from a porch planter. Music. Federal agents analyzed the clip and profiled the suspect as a man standing around 5'9" to 5'10", boasting an ordinary physique while hiding behind a mask, dressed in shadowy attire, sporting dark nitrile hand protection, and carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail rucksack that you can only buy at Walmart. A weapon sheath strapped tightly to his right side, along with a faint marking that digital enhancement experts suspect could be a tattoo on his right forearm peeking out from beneath the cuffs. And this crucial piece of the puzzle was independently verified by insiders at ABC News, CBS News, ADNZ, and Fox News. Music. A separate frame caught the mysterious guy without his trusty bag. And that specific snapshot was actually taken on a completely different date than the clip featuring his gear. Music, strapped tightly to his back, proving this was a scouting run disguised as an earlier stroll. The man showed up the first time to observe, to calculate, and to guarantee his music strategy was flawless, before vanishing into the night and eventually returning. Understanding that preliminary stakeout is absolutely vital when we start unraveling the mystery behind the reinforced entryway. Take a glance at any snapshot of Nancy Guthrie's main porch area, and you will find plenty of them plastered across the internet by media teams. Highlighted in music, Virtually every broadcast discussing this tragedy, and the detail is impossible to miss. Because a heavy-duty metal grate sits flush against the primary timber threshold music, this is no flimsy ornamental trim, and it serves zero aesthetic purpose. As we are talking about a hardcore defensive grid forged from wrought iron or heavy alloy wire, treated with a durable finish, music, to withstand the harsh elements, all anchored within a solid casing that is drilled deep into the wall studs and masonry. Installations like this are basically mandatory hardware across the desert regions, especially out in Arizona and the lower half of California music, where houses constructed back in the 1970s and 1980s relied heavily on these barriers as their absolute first line of defense: music. The engineering is straightforward but incredibly robust, featuring a heavy cage that opens outward while gliding on industrial-grade joints. Once you shut it, a massive tumbler mechanism shoots a thick steel cylinder straight into the reinforced pocket cut into the jamb, music. Leaving the solid wood panel cracked wide lets the desert breeze filter through the metal webbing, all while blocking out pests, local wildlife, and any unwelcome trespassers, allowing homeowners to enjoy cross-ventilation without ever putting their personal safety at risk. You can easily identify visitors and chat with them right through the steel grid without ever unlatching music, the actual deadbolt. Structures like these exist for one singular reason: to turn a quick break-in into an absolute nightmare that demands heavy equipment, serious patience, and an ungodly amount of racket that would wake up the whole block while leaving a massive trail of destruction behind. Laura, the woman living next door who chatted with NBC reporter Brian Anton during a broadcast that dropped on March 16th, has called the Catalina foothills home for over 10 years. She rocks the exact same heavy metal barricade on her own property. So watching that eerie clip of the disguised prowler creeping around Nancy's porch, she instantly picked up on a crucial detail that a ton of viewers scattered across different states' music completely missed. Because the guy on tape was absolutely not attempting to smash his way through that specific threshold, she stated it calmly, speaking with the rock-solid confidence of a local who trusts her hardware, pointing out that no one is simply busting through those steel grates. There is practically zero chance you are compromising that barrier. She went on, adding that she had chatted with a protection specialist roughly 2 or 3 weeks prior, and he backed her up, saying, "You are music, never getting through those cages," which proves Laura was not just throwing out wild guesses. She was pointing out a cold, hard fact of life that every single person with one of these setups knows in their bones: music, because bypassing it requires industrial clippers to snip the metal webbing, or an incredibly massive crowbar to warp the steel skeleton, or perhaps an eternity to slowly wrench the anchor screws right out of the plaster. Every single one of those tactics would generate an insane amount of noise, and they would leave behind shattered metal and splintered wood that anyone could spot from a mile away. And attempting any of those maneuvers, music, would burn precious minutes. We are not talking about the 41 minutes spent indoors, but a massive chunk of time just fighting the lock while completely vulnerable on a lit porch, directly in front of a potentially live lens, all while the folks next door slept right nearby. The Phantom caught on film is empty-handed when it comes to hardware, and there are absolutely no heavy-duty clippers in his grasp. Music. He isn't packing a crowbar either, and you can clearly spot his fingers in a few shots, sheathed in dark rubber and totally bare. Aside from the fistful of leaves he uses to blind the security feed, this guy definitely did not dress for a noisy, brute force demolition job against a hardened iron barricade at 2 in the morning. So, by the time the detectives finally rolled up to the crime scene 11 hours post-incident, the crime scene investigators stared at an absolutely pristine entryway, 0 scratches on the metal, untouched screens, and absolutely nothing pointing to a violent break-in. According to Laura, there is absolutely 0 chance that our mystery man simply walked right through that main entrance. Instead, she is convinced he was merely hovering on the porch, anticipating an inside accomplice to unlatch the lock. A chilling hypothesis she thoroughly explained while speaking to Brian Anton. We really need to pay attention to this idea, since it certainly is not just idle gossip from an uninformed armchair detective. We are talking about genuine insight from a local resident who actually walks those same exact streets every single day. She intimately knows the specific alarms installed in that subdivision, Having spent the last 44 agonizing days racking her brain over how such a tragedy could have possibly struck Nancy Guthrie, as Laura explicitly stated, he definitely was not the mastermind here, but rather just the getaway assist, lingering in the shadows for the primary culprit to emerge. She justified her bold theory with simple logic regarding that specific type of heavy-duty barrier. Those reinforced entryway fixtures are practically impenetrable, meaning our prowler was most likely just trying to peek through the gaps to monitor the unfolding nightmare inside. Re-examine the surveillance tape with that chilling context in mind, watching how the figure simply loiters on the stoop without ever attempting to bust his way indoors. There is no aggressive yanking, no fiddling with the deadbolt. Just a man staring at his feet in quiet anticipation while Laura picked up on yet another crucial detail. Nancy's entryway features dual transparent side lights, meaning if that solid interior slab happened to be propped open behind the iron bars, visibility completely shifts. On a balmy night, keeping it ajar for a gentle breeze would basically offer a crystal clear view right into the living room, straight through the steel webbing and those flanking windows. Conversely, a shut threshold or an unlit hallway transforms that exact same vantage point into an impenetrable void where you cannot spot a single thing. Laura suspects this shadow figure was desperately straining his eyes to check if his covert partner was prepared to move. He needed visual confirmation that their sinister plot was actually in motion, prompting her to suggest an even darker reality. A hidden intruder was already lurking indoors, priming Nancy for extraction. A silent partner in crime, pulling the strings from within. This explains why he stayed frozen at the threshold, eagerly awaiting his inside man to pop the latch so they could seamlessly drag the poor woman out into the night together. Let us carefully deconstruct how this terrifying sequence of events actually played out, starting with a phantom intruder slipping into the residence sometime prior to 1:47 in the morning. Sneaking indoors might have occurred through multiple avenues, perhaps involving an early evening infiltration right under her nose while she was still up and about. The culprit could easily have masked their intentions by posing as a familiar face, a friendly courier, a maintenance worker, or even a local resident from down the street. Basically, anyone possessing a perfectly ordinary excuse to come knocking on her porch, known by everyone as a deeply affectionate and welcoming soul who spent decades peacefully residing in that exact spot. Nancy would have happily welcomed a friendly-looking guest, assuming they did not simply use a spare key. Any previous contractor, regular housekeeper, or trusted acquaintance who possessed emergency access hardware would have had a golden ticket straight inside. They could have effortlessly breached the perimeter whenever they pleased without raising a single alarm. Alternatively, the ghost might have exploited an unlatched window or backslider, using intimate familiarity with her daily habits to pinpoint exactly which weak spots were left undefended. Regardless of their precise entry method, this predator was definitely already lying in wait when the unsuspecting woman retired for the evening during her usual routine. Given that she pulled into her driveway at 9:50 that night, she probably hit the pillow between 10 o'clock and 10:30, leaving the assailant to patiently bide their time in the dark. The monster likely crouched there for what felt like an eternity, ensuring she was completely unconscious. The surrounding streets were dead silent, and any chance of detection had completely vanished. Once the clock struck exactly 1:47 in the morning, the saboteur neutralized the porch surveillance device. Rather than violently shattering the lens or aggressively tearing the hardware from its mounting, they executed a calculated shutdown they incorrectly assumed would blind the system permanently. Ultimately, that clever sabotage proved utterly useless thanks to the resilient cloud backups automatically preserved by the tech giant's servers. However, it absolutely managed to kill the live feed temporarily, paving the way for a secondary suspect to approach the stoop somewhere between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning. The indoor phantom was clearly expecting this visitor, having perfectly synced their watches before seamlessly unlocking that heavy exterior ironwork, pushing the primary entrance wide open. The exterior accomplice slipped inside, which brings us to the most horrifying revelation of all. Working in tandem, the duo physically hauled the victimized woman from her bedroom all the way to the main foyer. The attackers bundled her in some type of heavy fabric to catch the inevitable crimson trail pouring from her brutal wounds, before lugging her out into the chilly night air. After tossing her into a waiting getaway car, they sped off into the darkness. eventually triggering a nearby surveillance lens 2.5 miles down the road at precisely 2:36 in the morning, proving this is not just some crazy internet conspiracy. We are looking at a meticulously built hypothesis derived directly from hard forensics and a firmly established chronological sequence. The metal barricade remained perfectly intact, while the main portal lacked even a single scratch indicating a violent breach. That massive 41-minute void stretching from the video feed dying to her medical implant flatlining strongly implies a slow, highly calculated operation was unfolding indoors. This was absolutely not a chaotic scramble typical of a solo burglar desperately trying to wrestle an occupant, grab some quick cash, and sprint away unnoticed. Furthermore, those perfectly circular crimson drops cascading straight to the floorboard, lacking any messy streaks or drag marks, paint a very specific picture. Such a pristine spatter implies a suspended body being delicately transported by a pair of criminals hyper-focused on keeping their messy trail to an absolute minimum. Finally, Laura brought up a purely logistical nightmare: the immense physical exertion required to haul dead weight when a senior citizen is either violently thrashing or completely incapacitated. Taking care of a dying parent is never easy, especially during those grueling final years. That frail, elderly woman barely tipped the scales at 120 pounds, making her a full 30 pounds lighter than Nancy herself. Laura vividly recalled how physically exhausting it was just to assist the frail woman up 3 or 4 meager steps. It was a brutal physical struggle, even when the older woman actively tried to pitch in. Imagine attempting that under the bright midday sun without any rush or the dire need to remain utterly silent. Because dragging a person like Nancy Guthrie solo is near impossible, especially when dealing with a 150-pound individual who suffered from severe movement restrictions and could very well have been completely knocked out or violently fighting back. Hauling her out of that residence, maneuvering down the front stoop, dragging her across the pavement, and hoisting her into a getaway ride without a single disastrous slip, all while operating in dead silence and miraculously avoiding any scuff marks or leaving grisly crimson palm prints behind, borders on the realm of absolute fantasy. However, the moment you add a second set of hands to the sinister equation, the impossible suddenly transforms into a highly achievable reality. Picture this: a co-conspirator was already lurking inside the residence, perfectly positioned to unlock the security barrier, meaning that porch video no longer depicts a standard home invasion, but instead reveals a meticulously choreographed dance between two partners carrying out a well-practiced scheme. That shadowy figure hovering on the doorstep never actually intended to smash his way inside. He simply stood by, patiently waiting for the door to swing wide open. Exactly 5 distinct clues heavily suggest an inside job orchestrated alongside an external mastermind. While every single clue holds massive investigative weight on its own, when you combine all the puzzle pieces together, they weave an undeniably dark narrative that defies any innocent alternate explanation. Number 1 on the list is the initial scouting run. Independent insiders verified this exact detail to 4 massive media outlets, namely ABC News, CBS News, DNN, and Fox News. The recovered smart doorbell snapshots revealed a backpack-free suspect prowling the premises on a completely separate date, long before the fatal evening when he returned fully equipped to snatch her. That preliminary trip was never intended to sabotage the electronic lens or execute the kidnapping right then and there. It was a textbook surveillance mission, specifically designed for him to stroll right up to the entryway during broad daylight or dusk, blending in perfectly, just to inspect the grounds, spot the surveillance tech, and memorize the physical floor plan. He desperately needed absolute visual confirmation that the intel provided by his knowledgeable informant was dead on. Assuming this ruthless intruder relied on an inside connection, a treacherous mole capable of detailing the metal barrier, the lens angles, the exact daily habits of the target, and the absolute perfect window to strike. Taking a physical tour of the area still checks out logically, since hearing a verbal description simply cannot compete with actually laying your own eyes on the objective, striding directly toward that wooden threshold, staring down that formidable iron partition, and figuring out the exact mechanics of its latch and the precise spot required for an interior release. Those are critical details you absolutely must observe firsthand. This initial prowl proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was no spur-of-the-moment crime. He calculated every move, And if he collaborated with a traitor inside the home, this dry run served as the ultimate green light before unleashing hell. Moving to point 2, the recording device suffered external tampering. Yet pulling that trick off demanded highly specific, private intel to actually work. That smart security lens abruptly cut out at exactly 1:47 in the morning. Federal agents and tech giant engineers burned through 10 grueling days salvaging clips from hidden servers, primarily because the attacker wrongly assumed he had destroyed the feed forever. He severely miscalculated. Brilliant coders unearthed lingering digital fragments beamed to the remote databanks right before the power cut, proving his sabotage method was still incredibly advanced. The victim noticeably lacked any premium online storage plan for her smart doorbell system. No random passerby could ever glean that hidden fact just by staring at the exterior. The electronic eye simply hung there on the wooden trim, hiding its secrets. To any casual observer, it appears completely identical to a standard smart home accessory. You certainly won't find a massive neon billboard planted in the yard declaring a total lack of server backups. Such intimate knowledge requires a trusted confidant. We are talking about an individual granted unhindered entry, an observer who physically inspected the internal setup, a tech-savvy spy who fully comprehended that destroying the actual hardware would successfully halt any immediate on-site captures, even assuming it failed to block hidden server restorations later down the line. Provided an accomplice truly existed, they could have easily handed over those technical vulnerabilities, leading the arrogant attacker down a path of false confidence, making him logically deduce based on the bad intel that smashing the lens at 1:47 in the morning would wipe out all visual traces of the impending horror. Point number 3 revolves around the absolute lack of a violent break-in. Detectives documented zero structural trauma to the protective ironwork. They found the main entryway completely pristine. The crime scene yielded no shattered glass, zero crowbar gouges, and absolutely none of the chaotic debris typical of a forced home invasion. Had the savage assailant actually smashed through her solid defenses, the residual destruction would be glaringly obvious. You would see deep metal gouges from a crowbar, shredded wire from heavy-duty clippers, or completely pulverized timber if some brute had booted that door off its hinges, alongside a mountain of shattered panes if a rock sailed through the glass. The total lack of such wreckage heavily implies the intruder breached the perimeter using one of 3 highly specific methods. Either he possessed a proper house key, had a treacherous accomplice turn the lock from the interior, or simply slipped through a latch mistakenly left unfastened by the victim herself, or purposefully unlatched by a previous guest who had unfettered access earlier that day. But if the killer truly used a piece of cut metal, how on earth did he obtain it? This cautious woman never handed over her private access to random, shady strangers. However, she likely shared spare copies with essential maintenance workers, highly trusted locals, or individuals who possessed completely valid, innocent reasons to enter her sanctuary. If a hand turned that deadbolt from the living room, you definitively have a treacherous mole. And if he slipped through a conveniently unlatched pane, that speaks volumes about his intimate, chilling familiarity with her daily routines. They knew exactly which deadbolts she turned and which entrances remained unlocked. They even tracked her exact bedtime routine, and when the property grew quiet, every single clue indicates the culprit possessed prior knowledge of the residence's interior layout. Next is the crucial 41-minute window stretching from 1:47 in the morning, when the lens went dark, to 2:28, when her heart monitor finally failed. Consider the sheer volume of tasks a solitary perpetrator would need to accomplish within that tight time frame. They must break in, navigate pitch-black hallways without making a sound, and locate her personal quarters. Then they have to overpower an 84-year-old victim who could easily startle, cry out for help, or fight back. If theft was intended, they had to scour the rooms for loot, locate material to bundle her body in, and lug her all the way back to the main entrance. Then comes the arduous task of hauling her outside, descending the stairs, crossing the pavement, and loading her into a getaway ride before vanishing. Lingering for 41 minutes at a brutal crime scene feels like an absolute eternity. Every passing second significantly amplifies the danger of getting caught. There is the ever-present threat of the victim raising the alarm, or a nearby resident catching wind of the disturbance. A passing motorist could easily spot the parked car, or the intruder might clumsily drop a clue that seals their fate. The average burglar prefers a lightning-fast smash and grab. A 41-minute duration hints at an entirely different type of operation. However, envision a duo executing this, hit a first accomplice hiding indoors, while the second sneaks in post-sabotage. Under those circumstances, 41 minutes is the exact duration required to execute a cautious, highly synchronized plan. It gives them enough leeway to restrain the elderly woman carefully, avoiding messy gashes, and properly encasing her to prevent leaks. It allows them to transport her weight steadily and load her into the trunk beneath the cloak of darkness. They could meticulously scrub away glove prints from doorknobs and perform a final sweep for damning clues. A synchronized team has the luxury of pacing themselves, whereas a lone wolf would be sprinting against the clock. The next critical detail lies in the forensic fluid splatter and the raw mechanics of transporting human deadweight. Veteran federal investigator Maureen O'Connell reviewed the grisly porch snapshots, using her decades of expertise to break down the visuals with chilling technical accuracy. The red stains plummeted at a perfect vertical angle from a fixed elevation. There were absolutely no shoe impressions, smears, or trailing lines whatsoever. Such a pristine distribution strongly implies the victim was lifted off the ground. Yet hoisting a thrashing or limp 150-pound body bundled in fabric is incredibly strenuous. Laura, a woman intimately familiar with nursing an aging parent, weighed in on this exact struggle. She recalled the immense effort needed to guide her willing, lighter mom up a flight of stairs. By comparison, the missing woman packed significantly more bulk, even on a good day. The victim's movements were severely restricted. Manhandling her limp or combative form would demand serious muscle and balance. If a sole intruder attempted to drag her out of the residence alone, the logistics would be an absolute nightmare. Navigating the main threshold, descending those steep exterior stairs seen in the case files, and finally reaching the getaway car would be incredibly taxing. While technically feasible, the physical strain multiplies the peril. The attacker could easily fumble her, scatter more DNA, or generate a racket. However, a pair of assailants makes the grisly chore completely viable. With one brute lifting the upper body, the second attacker could simultaneously grab the ankles, allowing for a smooth, synchronized march where both maintain their footing. They could instantly correct their grip if the heavy load suddenly shifted, though the crimson trails alone cannot act as absolute proof of a partnership. Yet, it perfectly aligns with a tag team scenario, especially when factoring in the bypassed perimeter fence. Add in the tight time frame, the unbreached locks, and the architectural familiarity needed to blind the lens. Considered, suddenly, the notion of a coordinated duo transforms from wild guesswork into the most rock-solid explanation for the entire crime. Suddenly, federal agents hit Laura with an unprecedented, highly classified inquiry. Did she possess any video recordings from January 24th, 2026? Up until that exact moment, the media had never once breathed a word about that particular calendar slot. Authorities are currently hunting down leads from that newly discovered timestamp with the exact same ferocity as their earlier probes. She revealed to the reporter that government operatives showed up at her doorstep on Friday, March 14th, barely 2 days prior to her televised broadcast. They specifically requested a deep dive into her personal surveillance archives for that exact afternoon. The officers actually pulled up chairs and combed through the tapes alongside her. They were clearly hunting for a needle in a haystack. January 24th happens to be a Saturday, falling exactly 8 days prior to the horrifying abduction. The 11th of January, which detectives previously highlighted during their neighborhood canvassing, shares a striking similarity. It also landed on the weekend, just like the disastrous 1st of February when she was ultimately snatched. That leaves authorities staring at a terrifying pattern of 3 interconnected Saturdays. Assuming the prime suspect was tied to a standard Monday through Friday corporate grind, their day job would completely rule out midday scouting missions, making the weekend the ultimate opportunity to prowl the affluent foothills undetected. It would grant the predator absolute freedom to stalk the neighborhood without fabricating a shady alibi for their boss, flying completely under the radar of bosses or coworkers who might otherwise recall him skipping shifts, zoning out, or probing into highly suspicious topics. A terrifying timeline is rapidly snapping into focus for the detectives. The predator initiated his stalking on January 11th. Music. That specific date likely matches the scouting video where the intruder was seen roaming without a bag. He marched straight to the victim's front step, staring dead into the lens. He evaluated the fortified entrance. He was verifying the exact intel handed over by an informant on the inside. He returned to the scene on January 24th. Exactly what went down during that second visit remains a complete mystery. While Laura's surveillance feed only caught local animals roaming the yard, nearby residents might be sitting on crucial recordings. Different lenses could have easily documented a car, a shadowy figure, or seemingly harmless movements, which suddenly carried terrifying weight when paired with the nightmare that unfolded 7 days afterward. Music. Then came February 1st, when he finally showed up equipped with his bag, his gloves, and a sinister agenda. 3 separate trips. Music spanning 3 consecutive Saturdays gave him ample room to perfect his entry, time the route, and ensure his prey was entirely defenseless. This story delivers a chilling but vital lesson about trust, awareness, and the hidden dangers of everyday life. Sometimes, the greatest threats don't come from strangers breaking down doors. They come from access quietly granted, from information carelessly shared, or from trust placed in the wrong hands. It reminds us that safety is not just about strong walls or advanced technology. True security lies in vigilance, knowing who we allow into our lives, what we reveal, and how easily small details can be pieced together by someone with harmful intent. A simple conversation, an unnoticed habit, or a moment of openness can become the missing piece in someone else's plan. This case also speaks to the importance of community awareness, looking out for one another, asking questions, and taking unusual signs seriously can make the difference between prevention and tragedy. Silence, assumptions, or hesitation can unintentionally give danger the time it needs. Above all, it teaches us to never take safety for granted. Kindness should not mean vulnerability. Trust should be thoughtful, not blind. In a world where danger can hide behind familiarity, awareness becomes our strongest protection, and responsibility becomes something we all share.